we're taking a look at David facing Goliath in today's lesson, and we're going to try to get some application basically of how we are to face life and the giants in our life. And that's what this chapter would be about. Most of us are not going to face a 9-foot giant in our lives, but there are principles that David brings out and that the writer of this passage has taught us, and every little verse in the Bible is important. Christ told us that not one dot of an I, not one period, nothing in the Scripture was written by accident. These are all stories that we can take and apply to our lives and learn something from it. So if you've got your Bible, open up to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Let's jump right into verse 1. It says, "Now the Philistines, they gathered their forces for war, and they assembled at Soka in Judah. They pitched their tent on one side," and basically, verse 2, Saul and the Israelites, they pitched their tents on the other side, and there was basically a standstill with a valley between them. Here at the this map, you can see where they came in from Jerusalem, and the Philistines are coming up from modern-day Gaza Strip, and they kind of met right there in the middle, and the Philistines are trying to push Israel back, and Israel's trying to push the Philistines back. This was a constant constant battle that David faced during his day. You can see this photo here. Took this picture when I was there in Azekah some time back, and you can actually go there and go down into the stream that used to be there. It's most of the time it's dried out, but it is a place that you can go today. So this place really existed. Verse 4, "A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp, and his height was about 6 cubits and a span." Now, to understand how tall that is, a cubit basically is from your elbow down to the longest finger on your hand. And the understanding that we have with an actual ruler is about 18 inches per cubit. That was the Hebrew cubit. And when you consider that times 6, you get 108 inches, and that equals about 9 feet. And then it said, and a span. So you're looking at a person over 9 feet tall. So he is literally a giant compared to the people that we see today. We see every now and then, we see some people that are very tall, and I can't imagine seeing somebody that was, not only my height, but another 3 feet taller than me. That would be a very tall person hitting the roof in my office here, hitting the door as they came in. But that's how tall this person was. So a very impressive figure as he faced whoever he came against. Verse 5 says, "He had a bronze helmet in his head, and he wore a scale of armor, and they weighed 5,000 shekels. Now, a shekel is 11.34 grams based on findings that we've had marked, and this would be about 126 pounds of chest armor on Goliath. Now, lifting 126 pounds would be tough enough, but that's just the chest armor on Goliath. And then it says his spear was 600 shekels, which is the equivalent of about 15 pounds. So imagine taking 15 pounds and being able to throw it across the way. So that's how tall this fellow was. Giant of a guy. Verse 8, "Goliath stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, 'Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. And if he is able to fight me and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us.' And then the Philistines said, 'This day I defy the armies of Israel.'" Now that's the key phrase that he keeps saying. I defy you. Basically, he's saying, I defy your God. Our gods, our armies are greater than your God, your armies. And they most likely didn't remember the stories of Israel coming across the Red Sea, the miracles that took place in Egypt, the provisions and the wars that the children of Israel won through Joshua. So here's the Philistines defying the armies of God. "Give me a man and let us fight each other." And this is a typical way that armies would try to not tear each other apart, preserve some life, and they would choose one person on each side, and that would be the way to resolve their differences. But after this statement, on hearing this, the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites, they were dismayed and terrified, looking down on Goliath, seeing, well, who can go against this person? And it's easy, I guess this would be a great application for us. It's easy to look at our problems as being so big, insurmountable. How in the world can we overcome this situation? And that would be the way that the armies of Israel were looking at Goliath. Who could overcome this person? So verse 12 says, Now David was the son of an Ephrathite, that's another name for Bethlehem, named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse, he had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. So Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. So the 3 oldest sons of Jesse are there at the battle front. But David, the youngest, is still back at home. So anyway, the firstborn Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shema are there at the war front. David was the youngest, verse 14. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth. He was able to run this distance. I can't remember exactly how many miles, but let's just say it's about 10 miles. And he would be able to run, very healthy young man, and sprinting back and forth, take a couple hours to go from his house in Bethlehem down to Azekah to see what's going on with the battle. And for 40 days, verse 16, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening, and he took his stand. And Jesse said to his son David, Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry up to the camp. Take these along with these 10 cheeses to the commander and their unit. Maybe the commander would look over his sons if he took care of, kind of like a bribe, I guess. See how your older brothers are doing and bring me back some assurance from them. Tell me how well they're doing. So then it says, see how your brothers are doing, bring me back some assurance for them. They are with Saul and the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So early in the morning, David left. I'm sorry, I had a phone call over there. David left the flock in the care of the shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse as his father had directed. Okay, so he's on his way. He reaches the camp as the army's going out to the battle positions. So you can see on both hillsides now, the Israelites are coming to their side, and the Philistines are coming to their side, and then Goliath's going to make his way down, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines, they were drawing up their lines, facing each other. Verse 22, David left his things with the keeper of the supplies, and he ran to the battle lines because he was excited. Oh boy, they're getting ready to go to battle. I can stand up here on the hillside and watch what's going on. And he asked his brothers how they were. And as he was talking with him, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines, and he shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. This is the difference. This is the first time David's actually heard this. He's maybe run back and forth, and he's seen them preparing for the battle, but he's not actually seen this confrontation take place. But now he's hearing Goliath. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear, meaning that they were not the ones to step forward to volunteer to be the one to fight Goliath. And rightly so. Most people would not say, hey, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to fight him with a spear that's probably a third the weight, or me being, 3 feet less than that. If you recall, even Saul was afraid, and Saul stood head and shoulders above everybody else in the army. So if Saul is afraid, a great warrior, if he's afraid, then the rest of everybody who's even shorter than Saul were going to be afraid as well. And that's kind of the setting here that David sees. Verse 25, now the Israelites have been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel, or basically he's coming against God's people. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from the taxes in Israel. All right, this is pretty good. So now all of the taxes that a king would impose on families, David is saying, hey, this would be great for our family. We wouldn't have to be taxed anymore. Plus, I would become a prince if I were to marry his daughter. So David asked the men standing near, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes them this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And that's the way David looked at this, that he's defying God. Verse 27, they repeated to him what had been said, had been saying, and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. So David was certain of what he had heard. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking to the men, he burned with anger at him, and he said, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know what you think. I know that you think you're superior and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. And yeah, David's wanting to see the battle, but David's older brother has probably developed this jealousy ever since Samuel came into his house, anointed his youngest brother, and he's probably still thinking, Samuel made a mistake. That old coot, he don't know what he's doing. He anointed the wrong one. David surely is not going to be the next king. So he's serving Saul, and he's looking at David and thinking, why are you even here? This is embarrassing. Just go back home and take help with the sheep. Do what you're supposed to do. You're just a shepherd boy. So verse 29, what have I done, said David. Can't I even speak? Can't I even ask a question here? I'm just wondering what's going on. I heard what Goliath said, he said. Verse 30, he then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and what David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. So David's already saying, hey, I'm willing to go fight him. And of course, in our day, we've got to question, what kind of crazy kid would even say something like this. But David was not crazy. He was a young man who looked to God, that God could help him through any circumstance. And he's fixing to list a couple of situations where he knows that God was with him and helped him through these other circumstances. And I want us to think about for just a minute, as we face obstacles in the future, do you not know that the things that we faced in our past have been the things that have gotten us strong enough to be able to face the things in the future? A lot of times we may go through uncertainties that we didn't know were going to come about, and we could talk about a divorce, or maybe a death, or maybe a loss of something great to us, and at times we think we just cannot get through that. But we think back, God has gotten us through other times in the past. Surely he will get us through this as well. And David had those kinds of experiences. Let's read this and see what we're talking about here. How does David know that he can go against this person? Your servant will go and fight him. Well, in verse 33, Saul replies, you're not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man. Basically, you're too small. And he's been a warrior since his youth. But David said to Saul, well, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after them. I struck it, and I rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, and I struck it, and I killed it. Now, I can't imagine grabbing a lion, but in the adrenaline and in his faith in God, he took whatever he had, and he's beating this lion over the head. I mean, you can imagine what that would be like. A lion would be bigger than David, but David is doing this, and God gave him the spirit rested on David to be able to do something like this, to be able to overcome something bigger than him. Same thing with this bear that he had already beaten in the past. Your servants killed a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine, he'll be like one of them. So he's using those experiences to say, if I can beat them, I know I can beat this guy. That's what our experiences are for in the past, to help us to grow. So every time we go through something, you need to recognize that God is training us. Even though that we don't want to go through those things, sometimes the struggles are unbearable at the time, but later on we realize we got through it. And I'm not talking about applying drugs or alcohol or something like that, because those things just cover it up and stunt the growth that God has planned for us. I'm talking about us being able to say, God, you're with me, and I can get through this through your strength, not from me trying to cover it up with some kind of medicine or whatever. I know that you're going to be with me, you're going to help me. And that's how we grow, going through a crisis situation to help us to develop into a stronger person. And that's where David is now. So we start off, this Philistine's going to be like that. He's defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of Philistine. So Saul said to David, well, it's been 40 days. 40 means decision in so many ways in the scriptures. And I'm not going to get into that. But David looks at him differently than Saul does. In this slide, you see where it says, Saul thinks he's so big you can't win. But David looks at him with God on his side. He says, He's so big, I can't miss. This is the way that we should be approaching every battle that we face. My God is so big, how could I possibly lose the battle unless God ordains something that I don't see right now? God is with me no matter what battle I face. I know He's with me, and He's going to help me through this. He's going to help me to do the best that I can do. So Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and bronze helmet on his head. David fastened the sword around his tunic, and he tried walking around, but he wasn't used to these. So he said, I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took those things off. Verse 40, then David took his staff in his hand. So he's got a shepherd's staff. He's going down there. I think he's probably going to make the giant mad by seeing that, but he's just holding his balance, I guess. Choose 5 stones. He chose 5 stones from the stream. There's a stream down in the bottom of that little valley there. And he put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. Some people talk about these 5 because Goliath may have had 4 brothers, but regardless, doesn't matter. He's got, it's possible that he was a little worried that what if I missed the first one? Because a shepherd would take this sling and they would use these rocks to, let's say a sheep is looking down and he's going in a direction that he shouldn't be going, and a shepherd would take that sling and he'd throw that rock toward the sheep, in order to reroute the sheep and wake the sheep up, let him see, oh, I'm not supposed to be over here, I'm supposed to be back over there with my mommy and my daddy. So he would use these to redirect the sheep, or maybe to scurry off vermin, wolf, coyotes, bears, whatever, and they became quite accurate. You can imagine him sitting there with his harp, singing songs, writing poetry, but you can also imagine excuse me, you can also imagine him picking up his sling with rocks and practicing. There's plenty of rocks in Bethlehem. If you've ever been there, there's rocks all over the hillside. So him picking up some rocks and practicing that, he probably became very accurate. And in fact, we know that through the sling, you can get up speeds of this rock flying some 300 to 400 miles an hour. It can almost, at the crack of a whip, you're breaking the speed of sound. So if you can get it to snap, you're up into the speed of sound. It's like 600 and some odd miles an hour. So this is extremely fast that they could throw this sling in this rock. So he picks up these rocks, puts them in his shepherd's bag, and he approaches the Philistine. Let's see what happens. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, some people say that he may have had a stagger or a walk. A lot of times giantism causes them to have some other deficiencies. He's huge, he's big, but maybe his eyesight wasn't as good, or maybe his gait or his walk wasn't as good until you get right up there on him. And you see, that's the way the devil is. He wants us to fight him on his turf, on his grounds. And Goliath wanted David or someone in Saul's army to fight him on his terms. You see, we cannot fight the devil on his terms. We will lose. So when Goliath is coming down, assuming that someone's going to come down and try to fight him in hand-to-hand combat, face-to-face, of course Goliath would win. But that's not the way we're supposed to approach the devil. We are supposed to approach him just like David approached him. Listen, I'm going to come to you with God. God is going to help me. And that's why many of the wars, many of the battles in the Scriptures, in the Old Testament, were won in different ways than the devil proposed them to fight. You don't fight on his turf. Don't fall into his trap. The devil sets trap for us. What we want to do is approach him with the gifts and the strengths and in the power of God. Listen to what David says. He looked at David over, and he saw that he was little more than a boy, and he's glowing with health and handsome, of course. He despised him. What? Why are you sending this little kid? He said to David, am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks? So he's got his staff there. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. Well, David said to the Philistine, to Goliath, you come against me. And this is something that we can say in the same respect to the devil when he comes against us in our battles. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down, and I'll cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And all of those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or by the spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. And he will give all of you into our hands. There's another passage over in Ephesians I want to bring to your attention here. It's Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. It says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not how we're supposed to do our battles, but against the rulers and the authorities of the airs, against the powers of this dark world, and spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. There are demons and powers of the dark forces of Satan that are coming against us and influencing people of the world and people of your community to do evil and to do wrong. And as they do that, that's where our battle is. It's not flesh and blood. So the Ephesians, the writer Paul says, therefore put on the full armor of God. And listen to this, so that when the day of evil comes, not if, but when it does come. See, we're all going to face at times evil. There's going to be a time you're going to go in a battle, and you're going to have to know how you're going to fight it. When that day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And how are we going to stand? We're going to stand because God is with us. Verse 48. So as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, he took out a stone. He slung it, and he struck that Philistine on the forehead, and that stone sank into his forehead some couple of 100 miles an hour, and he fell face down on the ground. That would have been great to see. In this last verse, verse 50, so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand. He struck down the Philistine and he killed him. And David ran and he stood over him, and he took hold of the Philistine's sword and he drew it out of the sheath, and then he killed him. He cut off his head with the sword. So what's the point of the lesson? I guess the overall point here would just remember whose side that we're on. We're not going to fight the devil on his grounds. He's going to try to come against us, and he's going to try to lead us to a fall or hurt our testimony. He's going to try to make us question our relationship with God. But man, we got to remember who we are. We are children of God. We've come to God and we've asked him for help. Lord, help me in my life. Let him help you. When you face those battles, call out, God, the enemy is coming against me, and I don't want to fight him on my own strength. I would lose if I tried to fight against him in his way. But Lord, I come to you with the gifts, the talents, the strengths, the wisdom that you've given me. All wisdom comes from you. All good things are from you. Help me, God, to know what to do. Fight this battle for me, and remember whose side you're on. And that way, every time we face our Goliaths in life, God will help us to be victorious like David was. Hey, God bless you. I'm glad you had a few minutes to listen with me today to study this passage of Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you peace. Amen.